Back down here in South Florida, and I am welcomed by a brand new poker room. Seminole Casino Coconut Creek moved their old room from downstairs to upstairs, and by doing so, the room truly did get a whole lot better. Now located on the second floor, the room truly has a secluded, luxurious feel. Not to mention, they actually added a few more tables as well. There's a little bar in the back if you want to get a drink, and basically this room is just everything you want in a poker room. So be sure to check it out down here at Seminole Casino Coconut Creek. As for today, we're going to play a 2-5 game and we're in for $1,000. And last but not least, a lot of you guys asked me what I use to hold my phone at the table, and the answer is a pocket jack. So if you want one of these, whether it being recording or watching a movie, regardless, I'll leave a link in the description below. In addition, it also comes with this awesome leather case. So if you want the best, most high quality industrial grade metal phone holder, grab you a pocket jack. All right, let's get on with the hands. First hand of the night, we look down at a suited gapper 9-7 of hearts on the button. There's 2 limps to me, and I definitely want to be playing this hand in position, which we will be in a raised pot. Trying to narrow out the field, I raise it up to $35. The small blind cold calls, and both the limpers tag along as well. So we're going to be going 4 ways to a flop, where we flop a good amount of equity. The flop comes Jack 7-8 with 2 clubs. It checks to the under the gun player, and he leads out for $60. The player on the cutoff decides to make the call, and for that price, we cannot do anything other than fold here. Yeah, we have a pair and a gutter, but some of our outs may be dirty considering that there's 2 clubs on the board. If there was a heart on board, we may be able to justify a float, but for now, we're just going to fold and find a better spot later on in the session. So we let go of the first hand of the night. In this next hand, we look down at a pretty one. We're in the big blind with a button straddle. We look down at 2 black queens. Definitely want to be putting some more money in this pot, so we raise it up to $35. We see a call from the under the gun player, and the player on the button decides that he's going to tag along as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop. Not the most ideal board. The flop comes out king high with 2 hearts. So we have middle pair and a backdoor straight draw. Action starts with me. Don't want to inflate this pot. I check. Under the gun checks, and now the button decides to throw out a bet. The button throws out around a half pot size bet. The button bets $50 and actions on me. I think for this price, we only have one choice, which is to call. We could still be ahead of a lot of holdings, such as maybe some straight draws and definitely some flush draws that we unblock having 2 black queens. I make the call, and I was a bit surprised to see that the under the gun player tags along as well. But I played with her before, and when the pot gets inflated and she's last act, she tends to float pretty light, so I'm not too worried about her. So we're still going 3 ways to a turn, which comes another 7. Obviously, no flush draw completes. This is pretty much a brick. I think this card probably helps the under the gun player a little bit more than anyone else. But anyways, I'm just going to check it, and she checks as well. Expecting the button to slow down some percentage of the time, but this time is not one of those times. He's going to continue betting. Now the button bets $150. So for a second, obviously, I'm thinking, yeah, this is probably just a pretty easy fold, and we can find a better spot. But with the line that we took, I kind of feel like my hand is pretty face up. With that being said, though, how many kings does he really have here? If he had a hand such as ace king, he re-raised pre-flop. He had king queen, we double block that. King jack is most likely going to be re-raising pre-flop as well. So the only king that we really lose to is like king 10 or maybe some smaller suited king. But I don't think he would be barreling those on 2 streets. As mentioned prior, there are a whole bunch of flush draws that we do not block. And I saw this player get a little out of line earlier on in the session. So my plan as of right now, if the river comes clean, I think I'm just going to be calling down on this board texture. So I decide to make the call, and this time, the under the gun player, she gets out of the way. The river brings a little bit of connection on the board. The river's a 9 of spades. The most obvious draw did break out being the flush draw. Queen 10 did get there, but I'm not too worried about that. Yeah, I check it over to him. Once again, no real sense in betting, and this time he does continue to bet. He throws out $210. As said before, I'm planning on just calling off on many rivers, and this is definitely one that I will be calling off. So I throw in the chips, and unfortunately, he got 3 streets of value with king 4 suited. So very nice value bets by him, but I expected this hand to be checking back a decent percentage of the time, especially for most 2-5 players. In this next hand, we see a +1 raise to $20, and we look down at ace jack offsuit. It folds around to me, and this hand I could either fold or 3-bet, I think, and this time I decide to be a little bit more aggressive. I raise it up to $75, and he is the only caller. So we're going heads up to a flop in position, which comes down ace high. He checks it, you put in a small c-bet, and he lets it go. This next hand, we look down at king queen offsuit in the big blind. There's 4 limps to us, and we decide to take the ladder, play it a little bit more aggressively. We raise it up to $40. Out of the 4 limpers, we have 2 that continue, the +1 player and the player on the button. So we're going 3 ways to a flop, which comes down queen high. On a board like this, relatively dry, I'll still be c-betting a lot of my ace high holdings, so when I actually have a hand that is pretty strong, I still want to be betting it. I bet out $55, and we only see 1 call from the player on the button. The turn comes a 9 of spades. We now lose to hands such as queen 9 and pocket 9s, but I'm not too worried about that. I think this player could continue on the flop with a lot of hands such as like a backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw. If you had a hand such as jack 10, 2 spades, maybe jack 10 of spades, he's definitely not folding on this card, so I think this is a good one to size up on. I throw out a 2/3 pot size bet, but unfortunately he snap folds, so I don't think he had much of anything, and we take down another pretty good pot. In this next hand, we see a cutoff open to $20, and we look down at jack 7 suited in the small blind. The button folds and action's now on me. This is a hand that I think I could do one of 2 things. I think I could flat here, and I think I could also raise here. Considering that the open came from the cutoff, which is in later position, I think he could be a little bit wider, so this time I elect to raise. I bump it up to $85. The big blind gets out of the way, and action is now on the cutoff. I wouldn't mind a fold. A call wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but unfortunately, he goes with the worst out of the bunch. He decides to put in a 4th bet. The cutoff throws out $275, and to be honest, for that price, we cannot do anything other than fold. So, unfortunately, kind of wish we just flatted here so we could see a flop, but that's how it goes sometimes. We unfortunately let it go, and we dust off $85, but hoping to find a better spot to get some of them back. In this next hand, we look down at a fun one. We look down at 6-8 of clubs in the big blind. There's a button straddle, and I decide to raise it up to $35. Maybe a little bit loose at a 7-handed table, but I want to get involved. We see 3 calls from the under the gun, the hijack, and the cutoff, so we're going 4 ways to a flop. The flop is pretty good considering we have 8 high. We flop ourselves an open ender on queen 7-5, and not to mention there is 1 club on board, so we also have a backdoor flush draw. I decided to put in a c-bet. I threw out $60 and we only see 1 call. So we successfully narrowed out the field, but now we just have to improve. The turn is a really interesting card. The turn's a 5 of clubs. So we still have 8 high, but now we have a flush draw. We still have our open-ended straight draw, but we also have an open-ended straight flush draw. With around $270 in the pot, she is around $225 behind. So I think there's only 1 move here that really makes sense. I put her all in for her last $225. Truthfully, a fold wouldn't be the worst thing in the world considering that we do have 8 high, but she does make the call. So we have a boatload of equity and we're off to see 1 more card. Praying that we see one of our outs, and it does come with the queen of clubs, but this is very worrisome considering that any queen or any 5 beats us with a full house. I table our cards and we are kind of surprisingly good. She shows 10-7 suited, so she certainly called us down light on the flop, and luckily for us, we hit one of our outs and we scoop the pot. In this next hand, there's a button straddle, and we look down at 2 5s in the cutoff. Under the gun calls the 10. I decide to just call when action folds to me, and luckily the button checks. Flop does not improve us. The flop is ace jack 4, but luckily action checks around. The turn is a 9 of spades, and action once again checks to me. I see no point in betting here. I check, and this time the button does decide to bet. The button bets $25. The under the gun player folds and action's now on me. This is the same player that I got in the last hand. She decided to reload, and I think this card could definitely improve her to a lot of draws. Hands such as queen 10's now open-ended, and he spades picks up a flush draw, and I've played with her before, and I know for a fact she's never value betting a jack or 9 here. A pair can beat draws, so I decided to make the call, and we're off to see a river. The river comes another 4. So now, this is a card that, if I was ahead on the turn, I'm most certainly still ahead here on the river. No sense in betting, I check it, but she does put her last $50 in the middle. Once again, if I was ahead on the turn, I'm most certainly still ahead now, so I make the call, and she snap mucks, so we make a pretty sick call to award us with a relatively small pot.
Thank you.
Hope you guys are ready for the prettiest hand in this game of Texas Hold'em. We look down at 2 red aces. +1 decides to limp. I'm the low jack, and I raise it up to $25. The cutoff calls to 25, and the +1 player decides to tag along as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop. The flop comes down a measly 5 high. So we have a gutter and we also have an overpair. This is kind of an alarming board because the line that the +1 player took certainly feels like a lower pocket pair trying to set mine. But nonetheless, when action checks to me, I'm definitely not checking on this board. We can still target a whole bunch of overpairs. I throw out $50 and we see a quick call from the player in the cutoff. Action's now back on the +1 player, and yeah, he decides to put all of his chips in the middle, all $360 of them. So a massive overbet. So action's on me, and this is a spot where, once again, it is maybe a bit worrisome that he has a hand such as deuces, fours, or fives. But at the end of the day, you certainly just cannot be scared of monsters in the bed. I think a player like him and a lot of 2-5 players, they just play a lot of overpairs very aggressively, just not wanting to see any overcards. So once again, if I fold here, I'm just overfolding way too many hands. So I pretty happily make the call. I mean, not loving it, but you know, I do have aces. So I make the call and the cutoff folds. So we're off to see 2 more cards. The turn's a 5, which is actually a really good card, reducing set combos, and the river's a 9. He shows jacks, and we scoop the pot. So one of the hands that we can beat, and truthfully, I'm surprised we just didn't get it in pre-flop. But nonetheless, happy to scoop in a pretty good pot. In this next hand, we're in the +1 position, and we look down at ace-8 of clubs. There's a button straddle, and we raise it up to $35. The low jack decides to make the call. She's back at the table, and I think she might be trying to get after me a little bit. She only has around $100 in her stack, though. So depending on the flop, we might just put her all in. This is a flop that we definitely will not be putting her all in because we want to extract all $100. The flop comes out all clubs. We see bet a tiny sizing of 15, maybe hoping to induce, but also just to keep any pairs in. And yeah, I guess we do induce as she jams $100 in the middle. We obviously snap call, praying that we hold, and we're off to see 2 more cards where we still have the nuts by the time at the river. So we happily scoop in a little bit more money. Wish she had a deeper stack, but what can you do? Can't complain when you're scooping in some chips. If you're done seeing premiums, too bad. We have one more for you, unfortunately. We looked down at pocket aces in the cutoff. Luckily for us, we see a player that opens up the action to 20 in the hijack. And yeah, 20 is not going to slide when we have aces. We raise it up to $70. It folds back around to him, and luckily for us, he decides to put in some more chips. It's literally just the dream scenario. He throws out $210. You absolutely just love to see it. Action's now on me. I look over at his stack, and he has around $1,700, in which I do have him covered. So we're both pretty deep for this 2-5 game. If he was shorter, I would honestly probably flat here, but since we're both pretty deep, I think I definitely want to be putting in another bet. Although 5 bets are pretty face up most of the time, against this specific player, I think that he knows that I can still have some 5 bet bluffs. With that being said though, I don't think I want to 5 bet too large to fold out a lot of his mediocre hands and maybe some of his bluffs that he has himself. So I decide to practically min click it. I raise it up to $550. For this sizing, it looks like he still has some fold equity from his point of view, but obviously we have aces and we're not going to be folding. Praying that he can continue, and he's thinking for a little bit, and looks like he is going to continue. But for all of his chips, we happily snap call, and we're off to see a run out and almost a $3,500 pot. We agreed to do 2 boards, so we're off to see 5 cards twice. The first board, he says that we're good, so we're absolutely free rolling this one. And yeah, the dealer didn't know that we were running it twice, so obviously I'm not going to be that guy and say, no, we're not running it twice. The second board's pretty terrifying, as you guys can see here. The run out is pretty miserable, but he mugs. So somehow aces holds up on that second board, which looked like it was the absolute worst thing in the world, and we scoop a massive one. Luckily, our aggressive image got us paid, and he did say that he had ace king, which I think I can believe him. But nonetheless, glad that we ran into it and glad that our image got us the absolute maximum in this hand.
Leaderboard belongs to me.
In this hand, we looked down at Queen 7 offsuit on the button. We open up the action to $15 and the big blind calls. The flop is no help. The flop's 8-8-5. I see bet small and he calls. The turn is a better card for me than it is for him. The turn's a king. He checks over to me. No sense in stop betting now. I throw out $40 and he decides to make the call. The river brings no help at all. The river is an offsuit 3. This time, he decides to lead out. The big blind decides to lead out for $85. Very interesting, and this is a spot that I think could be over bluff being blind versus blind. If he had an 8, I'd imagine he'd be putting in a raise either on the flop or on the turn, so I'm not too worried about that. A hand such as like 6-7 or maybe even 6-9 that was a straight draw did work out. I don't think he'd ever be valuing a 3 here, a 5 here, and if he had ace high, I'd imagine he'd just be trying to get to showdown. So I make the call with queen high, and unfortunately for us, he was bluffing with the best hand. He had 10-5, and he said that he definitely was bluffing on that one. But yeah, that's where hero calling can sometimes stab you in the back. A bit embarrassed about that one, but I think this is now the appropriate time to rack up and get the heck out of here. We were in the game for 1,500, cashed out for around 3,150, so definitely a good night, definitely ran well. If you haven't already, it'd mean the world if you guys hit the thumbs up. Please subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace!